This is by far the easiest free-to-play tower we have done so far. We'll do more yapping later on when we get to the full run, but let's just get straight into the builds. Now, starting with our Rita, level 60 Rita, 48% crit chance, 190% crit damage. Pretty good, you can definitely do better, but those are solid stats, and then 912 attack. For the partner, we are running Ivy in this run, however, a max duplicate version of Eloise is going to do just fine, and we do not use the ego skill on Ivy in this run. I do click on it towards the end of the run to show you that now would be a good time to use it, but then I cancel it and I finish out the run without using the ego skill whatsoever, so you don't need it. Eloise is going to fit you just fine. For the potentials, this is what we're looking at. Now, we are using a basic attack version of Rita, so we have maxed out our basic attacks here. Of course, the crit chance and the crit damage are very, very nice. The last node for more attack is really, really nice. And then these side ones are pretty good too, since they are going to buff our time acceleration. You do not need any of these unique card upgrades or these common card upgrades for the purpose of this build. There are builds where you would want unique card upgrades, but this isn't one of them. Then for the memory fragments, we are running 4-piece Line of Justice for that extra 20% crit chance on cards costing 2 or more. It's just going to help us with our consistency and making sure that we crit when our buffs are up. And then 25% crit damage from Executioner's Tool. Now, there are other setups that you can run with Rita that are good, and there's definitely room to put Cursed Corpse if you want to take advantage of Agony this season. However, we aren't going to be doing that in this build, but those are options if you would like to. And then of course we are running her at E0 because I'm not going to do a free-to-play run with an E6 Rita. That is just dumb. So for the save data, this is what we are going to be running. We will show a slightly more polished version of this towards the end. However, for now, this is what we were running for today's run. Of course, double time acceleration. It wouldn't be a basic attack build without basic attacks. Chrono Archon, this is going to make it so that whenever we run out of Chronicle Ascension, we are then going to gain 3 Chronicle. And then, of course, the normal buff of gaining Chronicle for each cost of a card played. Again, when we get to the run, we'll talk more about how the rotation is going to work. But this is the upgrade that we are taking. Time Axis Collapse. It's just a multiplicative buff, which is really, really nice. We won't get too into it, but essentially, we don't use much morale in this build because Rita has very large numbers. So because of that, we want multiplicative buffs way more than we want additive buffs. Additive buffs are good for smaller numbers, like when we were using Chizuru for the last tower video that we did. However, for characters like Rita, multiplicative buffs are really what you want. This also goes for characters like Nine as well. Following on from that, we have Chrono Circle, which is going to make it so that whenever Chronal Ascension is gained, we move all basic cards into our hand, which is what allows us to play 4, potentially 6 basic cards in one turn when using the ego skill. Time Paradox, this is going to convert all of our Chronicle into Chronal Ascension, which is how we get the second 2 basics. We play the first 2 basics, we build up some Chronicle, and then we convert that into more Chronal, which then will proc our Chrono Circle to bring those basics back into our hand. And then lastly, we have Persona of Boundary. Now, this is one of 2 options you have to take advantage of during this season. The way that this synergy is going to work is we are pairing Persona of Boundary with Yearning Left Hand. So Yearning Left Hand is going to give us 30% more damage to targets in a shockwave state, and again this is a 30% multiplier. Persona of Boundary will apply 3 shockwave to the enemy. These 2 here don't particularly matter, you don't need to run these. I choose to because it's a bit more damage, but there are other options you can take, and there is another persona that you can take, which we will talk about when we get to the more idealized version of the build. But here, all we're doing is making it so that when the card costs 0, it does more damage, and then we have the attunement that makes it cost 0. So that is one of the things you can take advantage of this season. As for the attunement we have here, this is useless. And the reason it is useless is simply because we don't have 15 cards in the deck once we play out our upgrades and such, which means we don't have 15 in the graveyard, which means we never proc the critical damage. So anything else you can get on this is going to be really, really good. Do not get this because we literally do not have 15 playable cards. In the middle slot here, we are going to be running Torture Toolbox. Again, there is an alternative to this that we will show a bit later, but essentially it is just here to increase the action count of enemies. There are 3 major benefits, especially during this tower and this season, to increase enemy action count. The first one, which has always been around, It's just that you have more time to kill the enemy before they hit you, which means you are more likely to avoid taking damage that you would have taken had they attacked sooner. The second advantage is that we have multiple bosses that rely on having a low action count to be able to kill you. So one example is the monkey on floor 140. He's going to take more damage before he takes action, and the payoff for that is that he has way more health. So you want to be hitting him before he takes action because he hurts. This is going to give you 3 more chances to hit him. We also have the floor 150 boss, which is going to rely on abusing extra attacks, and it will buff itself during its first extra attack. So you don't really want to take that long during your turn. You want to end your turn before they do that first action. And this is going to help you get those extra attacks in before the enemy can do anything and avoid turns of just doing no damage. And then the third benefit to increasing action count is there are some buffs this season that will only proc when you increase the action count of enemies. There's a couple items and also several attunements that will proc when action count is increased, so you can take advantage of those. We will not be taking advantage of those buffs in this build, but those are available to you if it is something you want to experiment with. It is really those first 2 benefits that we want. And again, this attunement is absolutely useless. Morale is already a useless buff for Rita, and this only procs when we have 40 cards in the graveyard, and we have about 12. So we're not quite there. And then lastly is the amorphous cube. I do not recommend picking up this item. Again, we will have an alternative that I will show soon, but essentially this is additive damage, and as we've said, we don't really want additive damage for Rita, so feel free to pick up any other item or the recommended one that we will talk about soon. Before we get into those recommended builds, let's quickly take a look at the builds for Rei and Mika. So starting off with Mika, all we've done is build her to have a bunch of health and defense because she is only really here to keep us alive, as well as get us a bunch of draw and AP, which we'll talk about when we get to her deck. For the partner, we are going to be running Nyx. If you want, you can just run Alyssa, or honestly, I prefer Arwen. And on our Rei, we are running Arwen. So you can run 2 copies of this, or 1 Arwen, 1 Alyssa. It's completely up to you, but if you have a Nyx, or even 2 copies of Nyx, then definitely feel free to run those. For potential, again, I've said this too many times now, if you need to survive, level up your potentials. That's all I'm going to say on it. Memory fragments. If you need to survive, get better memory fragments. We're running Healer's Journey and Tetras, which is the only thing you need to help yourself stay alive. And then, of course, pick up some health and defense stats wherever you can. And we are going to be running E6. However, E6 Mika doesn't really provide anything crazy to us, so if you don't have E6, this is going to work the exact same. And then for the save data, this is a previously used save data. We have used this in every tower video so far, so I'm not going to go over it. We will go over a better version of this deck, but essentially it relies on the source of water. It gives us 2 AP, and if we recover because we weren't at full health, that means that we get +2 AP rather than the +1, because obviously we spend 1 to use it. And then we have the Divine of Draw 1 and 4 copies of that. Now for this deck, it is really nice to have multiple copies because we are manually playing 3-cost cards, which means the AP is very much appreciated, even though it is Rita that we are using. And we don't have any personas because this was made before the season. Tactical Analysis, it's just an upgrade to make the deck smaller. And then Deluge, obviously it's always an upgrade anyway, and it's just a fantastic card for a little bit of extra AP. The items here are all terrible, don't worry about them, they are all bad. And then for Rei, basically the exact same thing that we said about Mika. For the partner, we are going to have Arwen here. For memory fragments, it's the exact same. For potential, they're also bad. If you need to survive, level your potentials. We are also E6 here. These don't matter, except for this one, kind of, but again, it's an additive buff, so it basically does nothing. When Rita is hitting with cards that have over 3000% damage, plus 20% isn't going to do anything. So you do not need an E6 Rei for this whatsoever. Now for the deck, we are going to be running yet a different one to what we have run in the last couple of videos. So firstly, let's talk about the triple Strike of Darkness we have up here. So Rei has 3 Strike of Darkness that increase basic attack damage. The non-Epiphany version, and then the 2 Epiphanies we see here for 150, and the upgrade for 80%. The reason we have 3 is because the individual Strikes of Darkness do not stack. You cannot take 3 or 4 of these Strikes of Darkness and play them and have that 150% stack. That doesn't work like that. So instead, we have 150, 180, and 100. Now we do have a draw 1 neutral epiphany onto this Strike of Darkness, which is very, very helpful. And this draw 1 is what allows us to be able to draw the entire deck and doesn't rely on any divines to do so. Now, you can, if you like, get a divine onto this Strike of Darkness here that gives you draw 1. On your Rita, you can get a draw 1 divine on your time axis collapse if you want to. It doesn't really matter. We just need draw 1 somewhere that isn't Mika's cards, because we already have draw on all of her cards. So we just need one more card to have a draw 1. It can be a divine on time axis collapse. It can be a divine on the first epiphany of Strike of Darkness, or it can be a neutral epiphany onto the unepiphanied version of Strike of Darkness. It is up to you. It's 3 options. On top of that, we have this Resonating Darkness. The reason we have it is because we reach our remove limit, so we need to keep something in. We keep an upgrade to keep the hand small. This is the base version with a neutral to give us more fixed healing. You don't need this. It's nice to have. You can definitely look for this if you want to, but anything is good here. In fact, the other versions give a 90% heal at the end of the turn. So honestly, it's better to get another version of this that gives you that 90%. But in terms of the buff, nothing here is going to help us whatsoever, so don't worry about it. Just grab one that has the heal on it and you're good to go. Snack time, we just want to make sure we don't take anything that exhausts our other cards, because we need every other card in the deck. So we take a draw 2, and that's just going to kind of help us set up on our first couple turns. So the last card here, Persona of Luster. I misunderstood how this worked. I do not recommend picking this up for your decks, at least not for characters like Rita. And the reason why is, again, this is an additive bonus. Now, this card is pretty good. What we have here is 1 stack of Blessing of Light for each Lux engraving, and we have 2 of these with 5 Lux engravings. So that is 10 Blessing of Light, which is basically 10 stacks of morale or plus 200% damage, which is nice. If you also get this on your Mika, that's plus 400%. On top of that, you can actually get 8 Lux on one character, because you can get the engraving here of Lux plus 1 Lux engraving, giving you 8 stacks, giving you 16 morale or 32 for the whole team. However, 32 stacks of morale or 320% additive damage isn't insane for Rita, but it's good. The issue is, this only lasts for 1 card. It hits 1 time, just 1 time for the 1 time and never again. 1 card on that turn. And that's another thing. It has to be on the turn. You can't stack this across multiple turns. So I wouldn't recommend picking this up. It is a nice 200% increase to your damage, but you really don't need this. But again, it is up to you. Persona of Luster, completely optional in this build. And in the refined version of these decks that we'll take a look at in a second, we actually don't even have Persona of Luster in there. But that is an optional thing that you can add. Now, moving on to the gear here. Amorphous Cube does absolutely nothing. I just couldn't get anything else. We will look at better alternatives. Torture Toolbox, we talked about why this is so good. So getting another one of these on Rei is also really good. Who would have guessed? Now, the attunement here is actually really nice. At the start of the turn, to weaken on the target with the lowest action count. Having a source of weaken is really nice. Things hurt quite a bit. However, several enemies have multi-attack. So instead of doing a big chunk of damage in 1 hit, they do smaller chunks spread out through multiple attacks. So if you can get several stacks of weaken onto them, that is going to reduce the damage drastically. So I highly recommend having multiple sources of weaken. In fact, on our Crimson Sword here, we also have 2 weaken on the target. There is also one you can get where taking damage applies 1 stack of weaken or vulnerable to the enemy that hit you once per turn. That is also a very good attunement that you can pick up. And we really like vulnerable because, again, we're using Rita and vulnerable is a multiplicative increase. Sadly, we have no vulnerable in this deck whatsoever, but if you can get a hold of some vulnerable, I highly recommend it. It is very strong. And then Crimson Sword itself is mostly here to apply some agony because of what we will get to in the refined deck, which we will finally talk about now. So here are the refined versions of the decks. So we will go left to right, starting with Mika, and honestly Mika and Rei for items are the exact same. So the first one we have here is the Cthulhu Tentacle, which is going to add 8% attack to your allies. And this isn't a buff to the damage of the cards, this is a raw attack stat increase. So it is very, very good on any DPS. So we do have 2 of those here. Again, it's going to be harder to get something like this, but this is just the more refined version. Having Tentacle on both of them. We also have a Torture Toolbox on both of them as well, which is going to give us 6 more action count. And then they are both running Gospel of Lament. So when action count increases, plus 30% damage to ally attack cards for 1 turn. Honestly, there just aren't a lot of great options for the relic. Now we can take Sphere of Randomness, but that would then mean not taking the Tentacles of a Ruined Age, and there also aren't many good weapons to bring either this season. So Gospel of Lament is fine. It is plus 60% damage for 1 turn every single turn, and it procs immediately when the turn starts because of the double Torture Toolbox. So that's what we've got going on there. For Rita, we have Esophagus of Madness. So this is the alternative to what we were running on our Rita build. This is going to give you a 20% multiplier. It's not 30, it is 20 instead. However, this item is much easier to find than Yearning Left Hand. Yearning Left Hand, you have a 1 in 3 chance, assuming you get the event, every single run. Esophagus of Madness can literally be found in the shop and drops from various other sources. So it is a slightly lower multiplier. This is also why you can optionally on your Rei run Crimson Sword, because we do have Strike of Darkness, which is going to attack the enemy and apply Agony, so that Rita can then take advantage of Esophagus of Madness. So those are your 2 options. You have the self-contained Rita buff, where she applies Shockwave and has the Shockwave weapon, Yearning Left Hand, or you run Esophagus of Madness and allow someone else like Rei to apply that Agony. There are other ways, and we will get to that in just a second. So for example, Mika has Persona of Boundary here. I'm not saying you should take this card. This is another optional card you can pick up. So we have Draw 1, and this does become Exhaust 2. But the reason we are grabbing this is mainly because of this Umbra engraving, which is what makes it Exhaust 2. That moves all Persona cards to hand, and we also have the engraving here that is going to apply 1 Agony to all enemies. The reason we would want to move all Persona cards to hand is because of this one, Persona of Obsidian, which is a Draw 1. When we draw an attack morale, who cares? Increase the damage of attack cards of this unit by 30% for 1 turn. And we have 2 of those, meaning that is a 60% increase. And we have a Persona that moves it back to the hand for 120% bonus damage at the cost of 3 AP, which we have an AP draw Mika, so we really don't have a whole lot of AP issues to worry about. It's also another way that you can gain more chronal stacks on your Rita. So this is another thing you can experiment with. It is Exhaust 2, which means you would need to use this towards the end of your run, but literally the last turn or 2. And because of this, you would also need another draw Epiphany somewhere in the deck. And the reason why is because even though this draws, you'll end up exhausting it, which means you need to account for the fact that we have 1 more card that isn't going to draw something else, since we aren't going to play it until the very end. So if you choose to take Persona of Boundary, you are going to need a draw 1 Divine somewhere to make up for that. If you really want to do something interesting, you can get Persona of Boundary on both your Mika and your Rei. You play Persona of Obsidian, you draw it back with Persona of Boundary. You play Persona of Obsidian, you draw it and Persona of Boundary back with Rei's Persona of Boundary to then play them all again. So you can stack up a crazy amount of damage for your final turn. However, again, if you get it on Rei, that's another draw 1 Divine you need. That being said, this Persona right here, feel free to get rid of it. You don't need it at all. It's just some fun theory crafting stuff that you can do for the end of your run to completely nuke the final boss. But you don't need it. You can completely get rid of it. Who cares? Last thing we mention before we get into the run is Rita has this accessory here, an eye plucked from a mural. This is going to increase the damage amount of this unit by 20% for each ally Persona card in hand. Now, there's a couple ways to do that. We can, of course, try to get lucky with our draw. However, we also have this setup for Persona of Boundary. So this time, we are still taking the move all Persona cards to hand. However, we are taking the one Blessing of Light buff. And the reason why is because it gives this card Retain. Another thing to note is that if you want to do the strat I mentioned previously with the extra draw divines, getting Retain will allow you to keep these in your hand every turn, obviously, which means you don't need the 2 draw divines because these are staying in your hand and aren't taking up draw slots at the start of the turn. Also, if you have 2 of these, that means you have these 2 cards plus Rita's 2 cards. That is only 4 at the start of your turn that are guaranteed. So you're not destroying your draw either, you will still draw 5 cards. So if you want to have an absolutely devious last turn, this is a setup you can have, where we have 2 of these Persona of Boundaries that have Retain and move all Persona cards to hand, and then we have the plus 60% Persona on our Rita. It's going to be a very AP hungry turn, but you can make it work. And if you're watching this in any other season, just don't use Persona cards. You don't need them. They're fun. They're really strong, but other seasons will likely have better multiplicative buffs. It's kind of difficult to find good multiplicative buffs this season because of the fact that it's more for Hyde and Diana and Adel. So because of that, it can be a lot harder to actually find multipliers because they want additive bonuses. So the season is really pushing a lot of additive buffs and not so many multiplicative ones. So you don't need these Persona cards, and if you're farming this in different seasons, those seasons will probably have better options than we do for this one. That being said, let's finally get to the run and talk about it. So kind of like the Chizuru run that we did last time, you do need to be a little bit careful during your first 1 or 2 turns because those enemies do hurt quite a bit and we do need some time to set up. So I definitely recommend taking care of 1 or 2 of the dogs on your first couple turns just to make it a little bit easier. But once you get through this first fight, the rest is an absolute joke because you do so much damage to these enemies. And again, we have 2 torture toolboxes, which is delaying their action count by 6. Again, you can push that up to 8 or even 9 by using a hairpin or another toolbox. And you will see that the damage just absolutely piles on, especially with that line of justice and executioners, giving us more crit rate and crit damage. Besides that, the loop is incredibly simple. Most turns, we will start with only 3 Chronal Ascension because of how we finished the turn prior. So, all we want to do is draw every single card out using our heals and our other draw cards. From there, because I am using Luster, we use Persona of Luster into Rita's Persona. From there, we then use Rita's buff, which is going to use up our 3 Chronal Ascension, putting us back to 0 and enhancing our next 3 cards. We then need to have 6 AP to play both basic attack cards. Once we do that, we play Time Paradox to turn that into 6 more Chronal Ascension, which gives us 2 more basic attacks, and then we end the turn there. Because of the upgrade that we have, we will then go to 3 Chronal instead of having 0, which allows us to again start our next turn at 3 Chronal. Now, you can play some hands a little differently if you want to start the next hand with more Chronal, but you really don't need to. 6 AP is not a lot to ask for, considering we start with 3, sometimes 4 because of wave, and then Mika can generate anywhere from 4 to 7 AP for us. So the only thing to be cautious of is just try not to cap out on your AP if you can avoid it. If you are on 9 AP and you still have a heal to use, don't use that heal. Pop a Strike of Darkness or something to go down to 8, and then use that heal to get back to 9 if you really want to make sure your AP is in a more comfortable place. However, it is very hard to mess up this deck. Once you learn the loop, it is the easiest thing you'll ever play in your life. The enemies take so long to attack that you have a ton of time to set up. You will see when we get to the final boss, I do end a turn early because they are acting soon. However, after that turn, it's just free reign from there on. So, super simple deck, absolute ton of damage, and of course, this is the free-to-play team. There are definitely upgrades to this deck that you can use by using better characters, using things like Tefera to generate more AP, using Rita as a buffer for 9 instead is also going to be a fantastic way to get damage. There are definitely other options, however, For the free-to-play team, the basic attack build is 100% the way to go. Now, this is a short run. I will let the rest of it play out, but before then, I just want to mention we are going to be doing a free-to-play tower with Adel after she comes out, as well as obviously doing a general build video for her and whatnot. You guys might have seen we have been posting Wuthering Waves content on the channel recently because I play a ton of Wuthering Waves, and if I'm gonna play it as much as I do, which is a whole lot, I might as well make some content on it. So there will be some more content. I don't know if it's going to be guide content and stuff. I don't spend money on the game, so I don't have all the characters. It feels kind of weird to make guide content on a game where I don't have everything, but we'll see. I just want to make fun videos, trying out the new characters whenever I do pull someone, doing, you know, old unit stuff and doing the end game with old units, or getting high scores or speed runs, or whatever it may be. I don't know, but expect to see more Woo on the channel. There will of course always be CZN coming out on the channel. These things are also streamed here and on Twitch. Sometimes I will stream on Twitch and not stream on YouTube, and that's normally when I'm playing another game that isn't a gacha or I'm hanging with friends or something. But if you just want to see the gacha stuff, that will be present here on YouTube, and then we'll probably look to cover some more games in the future. But with that being said, I hope you guys enjoy the run, and I'll see you all in the next one. Stay safe.
因果の光よ。記録者としての使命のために。準備できました。空虚の何度でも記録者としての使命のために。因果の光よ。呼びましたか？はーい、私やってみます。慎重に。元気が出ましたか？任せてください。元気が出ましたか？呼びましたか？はーい、行きますよ。元気が出ましたか？元気が出ましたか？元気が出ましたか？準備できま。元気が出ましたか？呼びました。私やってみます。空虚の中心に向かおう。はーい。呼びましたか？このままじゃダメ。記録因果の光よ。防御よ。空虚の記録者としての時間の隙間を封じる。空虚の中心に向かう。何度でも記録者と空虚の中心。記録者としての呼びます。慎重に。元気が出ましたか？元気が出ましたか？元気が出ましたか？いきますよ。元気が出ましたか？任せてください。因果の光よ。時間の隙間を封じる。空虚の中心。何度でも。呼びましたか？はーい、行きますよ。元気が出ましたか？準備できま。元気が出ましたか？元気が出ましたか？呼びましたか？行きますよ。はーい、私因果の光よ。時間の隙間を封じる。記録者として何度でも。虚無の彼方、すべての記録が集まる場所。この流れ空虚の中心。一気に畳みかけるわよ。準備でき。元気が出ましたか？元気が出ましたか？元気が出ましたか？呼びます。行きますよ。任せてください。時間の隙間を封じる。次は強力な攻撃者として空虚の中心で。元気が出ましたか？記録者としての因果の光よ。何度か時間の隙間を封じる。空虚の中心に。やっぱりあなたは最高だわ。艦長と私が力を合わせれば楽勝だよ。 今は本物でしょ。館長の手が温かいもん。